you guys in the room to run the meeting right now. I had an emergency in Ferguson. I'll be headed back in, but I'll listen.
Tony, go ahead.
Well, is there an agenda?
Tax review.
All right, so we do a roll call. Is anyone doing that?
Gary.
Here.
Grinberg.
Here.
Pepcorn. Strand.
Here.
Here.
Me.
Here.
All right, I've got item number 1, a brief presentation by the Fargo Assessment Department.
Good morning, Commissioners. Today you're meeting as the City Board of Equalization to equalize the values that have been placed by our department for the 2020 tax year. You're meeting as a board to equalize the values and not the amount of increases or decreases. You may change the value of any property so as to render taxation uniform. That is in statute. All city or all Board of Equalization.
Real quick, whoever, could the gentleman on the phone, could you guys mute your phone for now? Thank you.
Thank you. All Board of Equalization statutes for county board refer to the equalization and uniformity, as does the State Board of Equalization statute. As far as some definitions in statute for the valuations that we are to arrive at as assessors, all property is subject to taxation in North Dakota unless it's expressly exempted by statute. And there are a few things that people often misunderstand about the valuation for assessment. One of those things came up this year with the pandemic and the market conditions in the financial markets. If our values are going to reflect the fact that those two things could affect the value of real estate in the city of Fargo. Statute says that all property by assessors is to be listed and assessed according to its value as of February 1st of the year. So our values that you're equalizing today for the 2020 tax year are as of February 1st, 2020, meaning that the data that we used to arrive at these values were primarily 2019 sales. If there's anything, any external force, be it those two or any other issues that may affect the value of the property in the city, that will be the values that we'll be bringing to you next year as of February 1st of 2021. Also for taxation purposes, real property is defined as land, improvements to the land, and structures and buildings. That's another somewhat of a misunderstanding by people when we say that when we're analyzing sales to determine market values or estimate market values based on those sales, we consider the special assessments. Those improvements to the land that are taxable are the improvements such as water, sewer, the services to that lot that oftentimes are financed by special assessments, but don't have to be. You can pay those off up front by yourself. But the fact that they have special assessments on them is really irrelevant in the sense that those improvements have value. And we consider those sales, sale price paid to the buyer or to the seller, and any outstanding debt that is assumed on the property as well. As far as the property tax system, it's fairly simple. There's two components, budgets and valuations, that you're sitting in equalization today to consider. And the valuation is set this time of year. The budgets are set in the fall, and once the budgets are set, the budgeted amounts are simply divided by the total taxable value of the city to arrive at the tax rates. So it's simply a process of dividing the budget's amount to come up with the mill levy or the tax rate to generate the taxes. Taxable value, as defined in North Dakota statute, is a percentage of market value. the assessors and appraisers come up at an appraised value or market value. 50% of that is referred to as assessed value, and 10% for commercial property and 9% of assessed value is what is the actual taxable value. So last year in the city of Fargo, the budgets amounted to a little over 173 million. The taxable value of the city was 594 million. So doing that math, that's how we arrive at the mill levy of 292.44 mills. So if you take a $100,000 home times the formulas to get to taxable value times that mill levy, you get $1,316 less the 5% early payment discount for a net tax of $1,250 or a tax rate of about 1.3%. For commercial, it's the same formula, just a different percentage to arrive at a tax rate of 1.4%. This is just a graph of the mill levy history over time. Obviously, there was a point back in around 2008, 2009, where there was some legislative relief that dropped the mill levies. There was also a tax credit for a period that did expire in 2016. So that's how the comparison of the mill levies from the past and to where we are today. Our estimate of the total value of all property in the city, whether taxable or exempt, is about $16.5 billion. That's up about 3.8% from last year. Taxable property, the exempt in this category are the fully exempt properties such as churches, government-owned, NDSU, and so forth. Of the taxable property or the non-fully exempt property, there are some partial exemptions in the state for daycares, incentives for residential new construction or new industry or pilots, Renaissance zone, relief for blind, those confined to wheelchairs. And there is a credit out there that's been there for many years, the Homestead and Veterans Credit. And one of the things that changed this year is that amount always used to be excluded from the taxable value for mill levy calculation purposes. Starting with the 2020 tax year, that amount is no longer excluded like an exemption. It's included in the tax base. So that amounted to about $101 million last year, so that's actually an additional roughly $4.5 million in taxable value this year that would have otherwise been off the tax calculation for mill levies. And the other thing to point out is with the pilots, which is a payment in lieu of tax, there were last year $1 million, just over $1 million in actual pilot payments. So despite the fact that there was no tax levied on those properties, there were $1 million in tax payments of pilots. So if we look at all of the fully exempt property, partially exempt property, there's about $3.3 billion in exempt property value in the city, representing about 20% of all property in the city, either fully exempt or partially exempt. So for 2020, the projected taxable value is almost 623,500,000, making the value of a mill over 623,000, which is a 5% increase over 2019. Of that increase, about 2.2% is new growth, either new property constructed or property that was formerly exempt going to taxable, or just change in value on existing property. This is a historical graph of the past 41 years of annual changes in taxable value. One thing that I kind of found a little bit interesting, looking at the growth in taxable value, the total amount of taxable value, We have annual reports that go back to 1932 when the taxable value was 26 million. We reached 100 million in 1991. The first $200 million was in 2003. It took 11 years for the next $200 million increase, and the last $200 million increase took 5 years. So when we set our assessments each year, we are monitored and governed by the state tax department and the State Board of Equalization on where our values should be. They use what's called the sales ratio study. And that is simply every year, every sale that transpires in the city, we have to report to the state and the value that we had on those properties. And the sales ratio study takes the ratio of our value to the sale prices, and they array them in order and find the median ratio, in this case 86%, by class of property, residential and commercial. The state statute says that we are to value property at true and full value, which technically is 100% of market value. However, the State Board of Equalization does allow a tolerance range, given the fact that appraisal and valuation isn't an exact number. Not every exact same property sells for exactly the same. There's a range. So they allow jurisdictions by class to be within 90 to 100%. If we are out of tolerance, if we're not at 90% of value, they won't move that class property to just 90%, they'll go to 93%. So in this case, at 86%, they would give a 7%. If this was all residential property that had a median of 86%, they would adjust all residential property in the city an increase of 7% to get that median up to 93. So you can see that by, even though some were in tolerance, those are going to get adjusted up too. The whole class property, if an assessment jurisdiction is out of tolerance, will get adjusted. So we try and keep on top of those values and get our values so that we don't get state adjustments, because that broad brush they sweep does nothing for equity. We try and pinpoint things down so that it isn't just one brush that we do 10% all properties in the city. We do some proactive appraisal, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But through all our efforts this year, our ending values or ending ratios, according to the state formula, is 92.9% on commercial and 96.1% on residential. Before we did any of the reappraisal work this year, we were at 91.1 and 93.1. Now that ratio study is not something that the state, just the state uses for compliance practices. It is the tool that assessors and assessment appraisers use to accomplish our work and arrive at our values. Every valuation effort we do involves consistent running of ratio studies. For example, neighborhood by neighborhood, like the Clara Barton and Hawthorne neighborhoods, which this last year were reappraised. Just to give you an example of how we go about it, is whoever's appraising the Hawthorne neighborhood, for instance, they're going to do a ratio study of all the sales that happened out of the 1,030 some properties in that neighborhood. And they're going to see, they're looking for a couple different statistics. One is that median ratio. What is the median ratio of the most recent sales in that neighborhood of those groups of sales? Another statistic we look at deals with uniformity. It's called the Coefficient of Dispersion, or COD. It basically is, in in a nutshell, it's the average of every individual ratio from the median. How far spread are you to get that median of 95%? In assessment standards, 10% for residential in a mostly homogeneous area is considered pretty good. Our ratio of our current values to the 2019 sales has an 8% coefficient. So there is a lot of variables in what real estate sells for. So what appraisers do is, in those neighborhoods, when they're doing their reappraisals, they'll continually run a ratio study, see where they can maybe tweak the pricing models to get those statistics, get that uniformity index down, and get the median to the level that we need to be at. And they'll keep doing that, adjusting the model, doing that, until we get to what we feel you can get it no better from that point. So that's kind of the process that we go through with all classes of property, whether they're strip malls, apartments, offices, or residential neighborhoods. That's the process that we go through every year. So for residential, we have the city divided up into 5 areas that we rotate through to go in and do mass reappraisals, either by running statistics and simply running new pricing models, or actually knocking on doors and going door to door to re-inventory the properties. This past year, our activity of administration efforts and reappraisal included about 6,400 commercial and residential property values adjusted based on racial statistics, 6,000 residential and apartment properties actually reappraised, 900 properties inspected of commercial property to update data for future reappraisal, 2,600 building permit appraisals. We also processed about 3,500 ownership changes, roughly 800 parcels that were affected by splits, combines, plats, replats, and processed just under 2,000 exemption claims. The value of single-family property still has been on the rise in Fargo. We track that, obviously. We get all the sales, and we're constantly running statistics on the sales to see where our values are. We also have tracked that median sale price with the case and Standard & Poor's Case-Shiller Home Price Index, which obviously you can see what happened back when the bubble burst back in 2007, 2008, where we didn't have the bubble or the burst. We were just continuing to steadily increase. In addition to that, we also have a certain amount of our information online at fargoparcels.com. Ownership information, building and land size, the valuations for the current year, previous year. There's links on that site to go to the tax system at the county, to go to the GIS maps and so forth. So we do have a certain amount of our information available online. With that, I could answer any questions, or we could open up for individual appeals.
Any questions from the commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, question. Ben, I recall last year we had a discussion about periods of time in certain neighborhoods, 4 or 5 years before an adjustment had been made, and often, from my recollection, that caused some concern with some residents that it wasn't more uniform or consistent versus, every 4 or 5 years. Have we made progress in being more consistent in our approach citywide?
Well, if one of the problems, if you look at this graph of our actual distribution of our ratio of our values to sale prices, if it is 5, 6 years before we get into a neighborhood and reappraise, and you happen to be a property that, if you look at the left side of that graph, you get your tax statement, you maybe just purchased your house, and the ratio of the tax value you get on your tax bill is 70 or 80%. you can probably expect an increase when we come in and do a reappraisal. Obviously, people aren't necessarily going to be quick to call us if they're at 80% of value. If they're on the right side of that chart and their tax value comes in at 20% over what they just paid for the property, they're going to call us. So it's a matter of, I mean, we try and keep on top of it as best as we can, but it's just a matter of timing, how frequently you can get out there, and how long, if properties are low, will they be corrected by either an in-house reappraisal or, you know, just revaluing. Some of the issues with the lower values is there's likely been remodeling done that we were never made aware of and didn't have reflected in the valuations that we're coming up with. So that's part of it. If you look at the lists of informal appeals that I gave you two lists, ones that we have so far completed since we sent out the increase notices and ones that we're still working on. Most of those completed, you'll see that we did make adjustments to. For the most part, those adjustments are due to things that we found when we actually visited the property that we haven't been in for a while. So the other thing we have is sometimes when we're going through a neighborhood, we just people won't let us in, we get refused entrance. So we have to make some assumptions. And we're not going to necessarily assume, you know, no finish in basement or poor condition. We have to assume what's the most typical or what's average. So sometimes those assumptions can be wrong when we actually get out to see the property.
Ben, if you could, I've always wondered on page 14, that little school district number 2 property that's way south of town, what is that in the Kindred School District?
That's a subdivision that was annexed into the city a number of years ago. And offhand, I can't remember exactly what is in that area.
I believe it's several farmhouses down there.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's any development. It sticks in my mind, I thought there was maybe a trailer court down there, but I think it's just farmhouses. I think there was plans to do something and that more would develop around it, but that never happened. So it hasn't changed since it's been annexed.
Commissioner Pepcorn or Mayor, you guys have a question?
This is Dave. I do not.
Great. Mayor?
So we don't have any.
Well, you can go ahead. It's going good.
We don't have any recommendations for any action today because we do have a number of properties that have contacted us and we haven't gotten to yet. We also have some that we received as late as yesterday. I dropped the Home Depot off on your desks this morning that we just received the appeal late yesterday afternoon. So what we're going to recommend is hear the appeals. If anyone has shown up today that we have not been dealing with yet, we'll put them on the list, work with them, and we recommend reconvening in 3 weeks. By then we feel we'll have all the appeals taken care of and we'll have some recommendations of action for you at that time.
All right, if there's not an objection, we can hear whatever appeals are out there.
Hi.
Sir, if you could give your name and your address for the record.
Sure. John Bauer is my name, 12 Broadway. I'm the president of the condo association. There are 12 units in the facility, and a number of the people there asked that I speak on their behalf today. I have a couple of handouts which I could deliver to you to look at. I'll be very brief while I'm here. I can promise you. If you look at the values of the condos in past years, I think we all felt they were very representative of the values, of fair values. The changes that occurred to the values with this proposed change was very drastic for our condo. And there's three things I want to point out, and we feel that it's quite illogical how they came to these. Units 203, 204, and 205, if you can see those, they had an increase of 31%, and those are the smallest condos in the units, and they're probably the least enhanced within the units as well, within the 12 as well. So they went up drastically, and as one of my neighbors said, if you can find somebody who'll pay that for my place, I'll sell today. So that was a huge increase. It's easy to say then, okay, so the smaller ones have a higher square footage value because they're smaller and they're downtown. Then why do we see such a change here between other ones such as 301, 302, 201, 202, they've had huge increases in their larger ones as well. So the cost per square foot is very high for all of those. I live in 304, and it's beside me in 303 and 305, we have the same square footage and comparable interior. Mine went up 10%. My neighbors went down. And again, my point is I don't feel it's been logically assessed. And I'm probably an outliner here, but I don't have a reason for why that occurred. And then the largest ones, beautiful condos, went down as well. So the reason I'm here is to say that we felt it was fair and equitable in the past. We don't feel it's fair and equitable with the reevaluation, and we need someone to take a look at it. And that's my point of being here today.
And we did hear from someone a couple days ago, and we do have them now on the list. Actually, we just, I believe, put them on the list yesterday, and we're going to look at all of those condos and take a look at the values of the units, not necessarily what they were before, but what they should be now. We're going to look at it from the perspective of what is a reasonable valuation, but we do agree that they do need to be taken a look at.
Thank you. And the other point, too, is it's really hard for you in the sense that there are very few sales of condos downtown. So that makes it a difficult job in and of itself, too. So,
Sir, can you, what's the address of the property again?
12 Broadway. So if you think of the old Broadway, we're half a block south of there, sir.
Number 38, Tony, on the.
Okay.
Questions from anybody else? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And Greg, just while he's walking up here, ask him to give their name and address. When they...
Good morning. Ed Wilt, 1113 2nd Avenue South, Fargo. Value went up 22%. I've addressed the valuation board before, 5-6 years ago. They came over, reassessed the place, knocked it down, but it seems year after year it creeps back up. But I just want to make sure I understand what was presented before us talking. Is it correct in my assumption that we were in compliance at 92.8% for the state before the increase? Or the reassessment this year? So basically, I think what you also said is the city has a budget, and then through the valuation, you back into that number to meet the budget by increasing valuations. It's kind of what happens, right?
Isn't it more true that we would raise the mills to meet whatever
Right.
our budget would be?
Yeah,
So
but
yes, you're paying more based on what we want you to.
So the budget is part of the city's fiscal responsibility, which seems to gone crazy. I'm looking at this beautiful building here. So we reassessed the Hawthorne neighborhood. Is that what you said this year? What year would you say most of those homes were built in? 60s? 50s, 40s? Okay.
There's a wide range of properties in that neighborhood.
Okay. And I believe the old city hall was built in 61, right? That used to exist here. But that was deemed a bad investment to remodel. So the city built the existing structure. And their deal was they didn't have enough room. You know, we wanted to keep everything together. But yet we have incentives for people to invest in older properties. The city's telling you, do this in your old property. Okay, but the city doesn't do the same thing with itself. Anyway, this house was built in 1894, okay? Probably was there when the trolley went by on 2nd Avenue. And each year the value of this place goes up. Must be because you're painting with a wide paintbrush. It's not worth that. I'll gladly sell it to you for this price. I'll be out in a week. Okay? And I don't know if I'm privileged to be next to a lot of rental properties that are under Section 8 housing, which draws an interesting crowd, or the privilege of picking up the empty alcohol containers from the people that travel from Grady Ray to downtown each morning. Or maybe I'm paying for the extra police security that shows up weekly, 4 or 5 squad cars dealing with issues. Or the rental unit that leases to sex offenders across the street. You know, you really need to, I mean, you're telling people that you're appraising within 90%, but yet when the city buys out a house in the flood zone, they're getting 25% over their assessed value. So I think you really need to look at how you assess things. And I do welcome a visit from one of your appraisers. And I would really like it if they just brought me a check, and I'll take it at 90% value. Because something needs to be done. You guys need to really look at controlling what you spend, like I have to do, not spend and then go out and get that number later. That's all I've got to say.
Ben, is he on the list to get reappraised, or do we go with that?
He wasn't as of this morning, but we've got him on the list now, and we'll be contacting him and do a look at the property and do a reappraisal on it.
Okay.
Excuse me, I know this isn't part of the valuation, but the assessments for that property, 20-some years ago, they went through and did the streets, the sewer thing underneath. And they did the water sewer. They didn't replace the sewer line. They put a lining in it. They said that'll work. So the property was assessed a value, assessment by the city. That assessment wasn't paid off but 5 years. And the city came back again just recently, last 5 years ago, dug it all up and redid it again. They said they had to do the sewer. So now it's assessed again. Then the property got assessed for the railroad crossing, no horn zone. And then you know what else I got in the mail the other day? The assessment for Main Avenue. I think you guys probably use Main Avenue more than I do. And I bet you live a lot further south than I do. So I don't understand. You know, everybody complains you got these brand new houses. They complain about their assessments. And if Fargo wouldn't leapfrog in their developments and put a stress on the infrastructure of the city, we might not have such budget crunches every time this comes up every year.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Bill Klobeck, 620 8th Street South. All the other folks in our neighborhood are like me, over 60, and didn't feel like attending. I don't pretend to carry their water today, but know that their concerns are similar to ours. We're a pretty tight-knit group over on South 8th Street, and we experienced a 36% increase on the initial valuation of our property. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I'm here to strongly disagree with both the first and the revised value to our property and request a more thoughtful review. You originally had us last year perhaps inflated 90% at $382,000. And the increase up to $525,000, as the previous gentleman stated. If you would care to bring a certified check anytime today. See, we also have a unique situation, as I'm sure everyone does. My wife's great-grandfather built the house. We raised our son, the 5th generation, to live in the same house. I don't know how many people get that opportunity. We've been involved in our neighborhood and our city. This is a core neighborhood that we've been discussing with some of the various city parts. 36%. Then on reconsideration, it was dropped to about a 10% increase. Again, considering these times, I would hold that the true and present value of almost all the real estate in Fargo is next to nothing, because I don't think anyone's going to pull out their checkbook today and buy anything. And this situation may continue for the foreseeable future. So I believe that you have placed an undue burden on our neighborhood. Myself, my neighbors, are, again, the previous gentleman stated it. On one hand, your policy seems to want to encourage neighborhood development, and us continuing the core neighborhood, a small school, and yet then we get this kind of negative, very negative, and unthinking, blanket, Orwellian. We're all in it together, chum, but apparently you get to pay a little higher price. I noticed that the larger, much larger home across the street this year, again on the reassessment, it only went up 8% in value, from $1.1 million to $1.2 million. I don't accept the current assessed value because I don't think it has any basis in reality. I'd also like to point out that when you utilize comparables from our neighborhood, which I was presented with several in the Claire Barton neighborhood, not the Hawthorne neighborhood, because there haven't been any sales, the realtor commission price is not deducted from the sale price, which could also lead to a 5 or 6% variation in your valuation, which I didn't see. Noted it. So I don't accept your current valuations. I think you're pushing us pretty hard here in the neighborhood, speaking for my neighbors. And I would urge you to please fulfill your responsibilities as city officials and do a little better job. I think we have a referenda coming up again that may eliminate this question, and I'm not sure what we're going to do then. So you're going to have to find a more equitable methodology here, or I think the people are going to get mad and remove your ability to have property tax. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that we can come to an amicable solution. Any questions?
Commissioners?
Just to clarify then, Ben, this, I see it's on the list, you'll be visiting and
Correct, we'll have a recommendation when you reconvene.
Do you remember when we used to have the personal property tax in Fargo? You're probably a little young for that. But I think you should be able to come up with a pretty good idea. Apparently someone drove through our neighborhood and said, wow, look at all those nice trees. Well, it's not the trees. Or my neighbor who put on a new roof. Oh my, that must have increased the value. A roof? Does paint increase the value? Do curtains increase the value? Rugs, furniture? I know it costs $250. I work in the architecture field. I know what it costs to build buildings these days. But again, when you have an original owner on a 1926 property, I love it, but what's it worth? I mean, it's like we have a gun to our head. And it's a disincentive to maintain and keep up our property. I lived in New York for many years. I can spray paint my place up and throw trash all over the yard, and you can say, well, gee, that's a dump. That can't, get a big dog, you can't come in. Play that game too. That's not what I'm, so I am disincentivized from maintaining or even maintaining my property. That seems arbitrary and capricious. Got to come up with a little better way here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's it. All right. Next item on the agenda is to adjourn or set a time to reconvene. You have a motion to reconvene and discuss after we've had these appraisals re-looked at. I think Ben suggested 3 weeks. Is there a motion any commissioner wants to make?
do we need a motion?
We have to set a time frame. Is that correct, Ben?
Do you have a specific date then you're going to recommend in time? Same time, 3 weeks from now, 21 days from today?
I believe it is May 5th would be 3 weeks from today.
7:30 a.m.? I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, with second. Any comments from the other commissioners on the phone?
Nope.
Okay. All right, roll call.
Greenberg,
Aye.
Strand,
Yes.
Pepcorn,
Aye.
Mahoney,
Aye.
Gehrig.
Yes. All right, before we go, I just want to, for anyone watching, I want to point out to folks that what Ben told us is important. The evaluation of your home is part of the equation. If your valuation goes up a certain amount, that does not mean automatically that your taxes will go up that percentage. The mills also play a role in that. And this year, what we've heard is that overall there's a 5% increase. If we did nothing to the mills and we accepted the increase in valuations, we'd receive 5% more in taxes. That does not have to be the case. So as many of the gentlemen that came here today said, it's up to us to be responsible with what we're going to be levying for mills. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are going to watch very closely as to if we reduce them or if we accept the increase. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed?
Aye.
Adjourned.
Aye.